Hello everyone, today we're going to go over all the checks we want to do before we gauge up. So I have some new trainees with me, so we're going to create a chart and we're going to go over everything we need to check before gauges go on the system. So as you can see here, we have an iced up evaporator coil. So let's make that our first check that we're going to go through. Alright, so the first check we're going to do is check for a frozen evaporator coil. And the possible causes for that could be faulty evaporator fan or blade, a bad temp controller, which is super common. So our temp controller is set to whatever setting between 1 and 9, and it's a cooler. We're going below 32 Fahrenheit. Condensing unit is still running. Chances are you have a bad temp controller. If we have a backed up drain, if the door is not closing properly or sealing properly, and in a freezer we could have a bad defrost element, probe, or defrost clog. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is check our fans. So in this case we have two evaporator fans. Okay, in this case they are both running. We want to make sure the fan blades are not damaged. And from here we're going to move on down to the condenser fan and make sure it's running. Alright, so as you can see from there, our next check is to check for a faulty evaporator or condenser fan and or fan blade. And if we do have a bad fan, we want to check for power at the fan. And if we have a freezer, we want to check for a bad defrost termination switch and then replace as needed. The next thing we're going to check is the condenser. Is it dirty? Is it plugged? So we're going to use a brush and then we're going to just hit it up with Viper spray and shine a light through it and make sure everything's good and clean. Alright, so heading back over to our cooler freezer troubleshooting checks chart. Is the condenser coil dirty? And if it is, we're going to clean with a coil brush and then we're going to spray our Viper spray and inspect it with a light. It's important that you use the light because it can be very deceiving. If you brush just the front of the coil, the back of it could be filthy. It could be plugged with fryer oil. Who knows? So it's very important that you put the light in there and that the light's shining through every row of that condenser coil. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is check the compressor. As you can see here, we're drawing 32 amps and going off on overload. So this is our overload right here. If we have power at this overload and there's no amp draw, you probably have a bad overload. This is the relay, and then we have the capacitor, which is going to help kickstart the compressor. So we can eliminate all three of these components with a 3-in-1 hard start kit. And hard start kit is installed, and just like that, we're drawing 7 amps. We've saved this compressor. This unit is running. We did not need to gauge up. And our final check is the compressor running? So if we have no voltage at the compressor, we're going to check the temp controller. So an easy check for this is if the condenser fan's not running. On most models, it's wired in series with this temp controller, so that's a dead giveaway. Okay, the next thing we want to check is, do we have voltage at the overload? Okay, if we have voltage at the overload and no amp draw, that overload is probably bad. We will replace it. Sometimes it fails for a reason, sometimes they just fail. Okay, and then last is replacing that relay overload and capacitor. So instead of stocking a bunch of capacitors, overload, and relays, you can just put a 3-in-1 hard start kit, fire it up, and see if the compressor runs. If the compressor runs, based on the manufacturer's recommendations, whether it's under warranty or not, we recommend installing the OEM start components. But there are times that it's okay to leave in these 3-in-1 hard start kits. They are pretty reliable. And from my experience, they do not damage the compressor on these little compressors. So as a new tech starting out, you're going to feel the urge to gauge up. Okay, you're going to be excited. You're going to have your gauges. And technically, you're not even supposed to gauge up. The word should be probe up, which I don't know if that translates very well, but you should be using your smart probes because we're critically charged. Okay, we don't want to put our gauges on and we pull some of the charge out when we take our hoses off. Now there's times when the system's completely sealed and there are no access ports. So the only way to get into the system is to install a line tap. You do not want to install a line tap until you've gone through all these checks. Okay, make it simple. Go through these checks. And this applies for walk-in coolers, walk-in freezers, definitely for ice machines. Do all of these checks before you even tap into the system. We just want to keep it simple. Stick to the basics, break things down, go through your flow charts. This is your flow chart number 1, okay? If you go through all this and everything checks out, that means we have a refrigeration problem, okay? And that's when we'll go to our refrigeration troubleshooting flowchart, and then we start going through those steps. All right, so it's one thing at a time. Do not reverse the order. Try to follow the same steps every time, where it literally becomes muscle memory, and you can just coast on autopilot and go troubleshoot these things stress-free and very, very efficiently and quickly.